This is really not a good way to start. Okay, so terwijl looks straight, lojam til, iodom lojam til, looks straight. No control, no constraint, just us. I am very pleased to be here to speak with you today, and I'm thankful for your patience in waiting 5-10 minutes because of the traffic, etc. Thank you for the warm introduction, and special thanks to the Centre for Khmer Studies and Human Science Encounters put on pen. I'd also like to thank Deakin University. I'm presenting from research today done as part of my doctorate, and I have to acknowledge World Vision, who provided funding for the data collection. I'm going to talk about 2 reintegrating pathways today. I'm not comfortable with this microphone yet. Can you bear with me for half a moment? Take it. That's much better. Thank you. Okay. So 2 reintegrating pathways, and let me just run through the main. Well, maybe why I'm here might be a good start. I'm a youth worker. Well, I was a youth worker in Melbourne, Australia. And as a volunteer, I came here with my wife, without whose support, this wouldn't have been completed. So, as volunteers, we came to Cambodia and became involved in researching youth issues, etc., violence, etc. So we came in 2002. And we've been here on and off since then, off at the moment. We're presently in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where I'm supporting Sarah, who's the main breadwinner. I've got 3 children who I look after, and I try and write from this dissertation at the moment. Let me summarise what I want to talk about today, and I'm going to try and keep it to around 40 minutes to allow time for questions afterwards. That's my aim, okay? The first main thing I want to point out is that our ideas of what reintegration is can actually distract us from what's going on in social reality. They can actually affect our programs. Our ideas of reintegration actually guide our programs, right? So this presentation is going to focus on what's actually happening according to the data, and then we can then think from that about how that should influence our programs. So, in fancy words, we can talk about procedural and substantive elements of reintegration. Basically, I'm going to tell you today that there are 2 parts to reintegration. So on the one hand, sometimes we might say, I reintegrated her back to Kampong Spoo last week, yeah? When the projection worker says, I reintegrated her, they didn't really, we know what they mean, right? We provided some assistance which helped them be placed in a certain location. That was the provision of assistance. Whether or not she's actually integrated into that social community, that family, that village, is a whole other different thing, right? So when we speak of reintegration, we've got procedural conceptions of reintegration over here, and we've got substantive elements of reintegration over here. Procedural, what we do. Substantive, what happens in social reality? What are the mechanisms? What social groups? We're talking about integrating somewhere, right? What social groups are relevant to integration for different types of people? What cultural norms? What social norms? Getting these 2 things separate is the start of getting our programming straight. So, I think I've elaborated on that enough. Now I've got to... The main point, there's a few points along the way, but the main point is you've got very different ways that social integration happens in social life within modern, urban, individualistic social milieu. And you've got very different ways that social integration happens within traditional, rural, collectivistic social milieu. This isn't really that complicated, it's kind of obvious. In the city, you know, where people are influenced by education and modern values, rights, where we are individuals. We are trained to be individuals, and we integrate with each other on the basis of respect and our individuality. Within traditional environments, integration occurs around social roles, right? Within a social hierarchy. So, playing your role correctly within a very traditional environment is key to social integration. So, I'm talking about 2 pathways to social integration. Now, that was like going really fast, right? Right to the main point. I'm going to now take you through it and the data and the process to try and sort of show you how I've got to these claims. This is the overall outline. And please, any questions, please jot them down. You'll have time at the end. And if not at the end, I'd love any of you who'd like to talk about it more to come to FCC, which is where I'll be after 7:30. So context. And why am I talking about the reintegration of sexualised Cambodian women? Nobody talks about sexualised Cambodian women. We talk about them being trafficked, right? Or sexually exploited or raped or, you know, we're using these other terms. Why am I using the word sexualised? Okay, what you're seeing at the moment is actually data from a Johns Hopkins study undertaken in 2008, qualitative study in groups where, in shelters where the assistance is being provided. And they've described their problems, which were listed out, and I've just copied them, pasted them, literally put them into Wordle. So all of the qualitative data is shown before you. So what you can see up there is the main problems they face. Now there's one line really that stood out for me in that report. And the line said something like, I paraphrase, the effect of being rejected in everyday life, the ongoing effects of social rejection was at least as injurious, if not more injurious, than any of the sexual violence that they'd experienced. I'll say it again, it was not about the sex, it was about the rejection. So why am I calling them sexualised young women? The problem is they're being rejected and socially marginalised on the basis of past sexual behaviour. More fundamental than the particular type of abuse experienced is the fact that it's a deviation from being a good Cambodian woman, and it's affecting the way people are then treating them in communities. Now, I can see practitioners in the room. This is nothing new. This is really nothing new. Okay. Yes?
Can you hold the microphone a little bit further away?
Can everyone hear me like this?
Yeah. It might be better.
I would prefer it because it's kind of distracting me too. Perfect, okay. I like this definition of reintegration. There are a range of definitions around, and people who define reintegration are often also talking about how assistance should be provided. This definition actually keeps separate the provision of assistance and the idea of social integration. See here, reintegration tells us that it's about processes of inclusion and rebuilding of relationships. This comes from the Asia Foundation report in about 2005. It was repeated in the Long Way Home, the Hagar World Vision report in 2008. It's cited in a lot of places. There are other definitions out there. I'm putting this up because it's actually pretty good. It doesn't tell you how the rebuilding of relationships occur. It's saying reintegration is relational. It's not telling you how still. I'm wanting to talk about how today. But then what I like is that it separates this from reintegration assistance. So we have the two definitions. This is reintegration, which is an ideal aim or a goal. And we have reintegration assistance, which is the stuff we would like to give people and the services and the support that is going to help them get there, we hope. Big difference between the two. Important to keep the distinction. So, what was the research question that I was approaching? How do young Khmer women who have experienced sexual violence, so this included sex trafficking and rape and sexual abuse, and who have spent time in residential care or shelter care,
how do they construct ideas related to reintegration? Who, what are the people, processes and mechanisms important to achieving this success? And then amongst these groups and institutions, how are these ideas constructed and practiced? Now, why was I interested in this? Well, as a practitioner, as an advisor who's aiming to give resources and support and research assistance to groups who are doing reintegration work, they're providing reintegration assistance. As an advisor, I didn't know what reintegration was. It wasn't very clear to me. And if it's not clear to me and I'm supposed to be giving advice to other people, so there's a problem, right? So thanks for the opportunity to do this research and then the support I had to do that. And I've stepped out of the field to do this. So, learning from young women themselves and also the other people who they think are important to how social integration occurs. Now, the methodology I've used is called grounded theory methodology. This means, and it's a good methodology for me, right? Because I had no idea. I didn't have a theory of how reintegration happened. I was just confused by it. Yeah? So, instead of starting with a hypothesis and then seeking to test it, disprove it, prove it, instead I've started with a question or a series of questions, right? Related to what is this thing we're talking about? And then from there, gone between empirical data and theory, empirical data theory, to build up a grounded theory of reintegration. So this particular methodology dates back to the 1960s. I'm following sort of Corbin and Strauss's take on this and a lady called Kathy Sharmaz. So this is the methodology. I'm not going to labour on the process because I want to get to the findings and the implications for practice, right? But it's all there in the dissertation that's freely available online. If you'd like the details of the ethics review process in Australia, in Cambodia, and all of the work that was done to sort of get it in play. What I will say is that this research was supported by 4 organisations who I'm very thankful to, who were identified. I was given a list of 8 organisations by the National Committee on Anti-Trafficking. They said, these are the top 8 who are doing the best work on reintegration. So from that top 8, I have got 4 to participate. I'm not saying if any said yes or any said no, because that list, someone might remember it. Anyway, these groups are anonymous. And the participation was anonymous to allow for the protection of their reputation in case anything terrible came out, or, you know, this is my way of protecting the groups who were involved. And I've been very thankful for the opportunities to meet with representatives of some of those groups yesterday, and I've got more meetings tomorrow talking about the implications. So it's important to me, the field, you know, this is the interesting thing for me. I also just want to emphasize here the role of the female translator. And part of the reason why I'm making you wait is because Sapia was going to be here tonight. Seng Sapia, without whom this research would not have happened, who I'm hugely in debt to because she's such a good person who really gave of her life over 20 months while I did the data collection. So as a male, as an Australian male, as a foreigner with average Khmer skills, this information would have been completely inaccessible to me without Sapia, who, you know, was absolutely incredible. So I'm sorry she's not here. I'm worried she couldn't find it, but she was coming, but yeah. I will keep moving, but thanks, Sapia. So, what are the limitations of this research? Well, just keep in mind that everything I say, I am talking about this top group of well-funded organisations, right? So I'm talking about the ones who are identified as doing good work and who are relatively more resourced than other groups. So when I'm talking about the provision of services, etc., I'm not describing the average experiences of children in orphanages or there's a lot of shelters. There's at least 100-200 shelters, and orphanages, there's hundreds and hundreds, right? This is not reflective. I'm not documenting what's happening for everyone. I'm contributing to an understanding of success and what we should be aiming for with people who are trafficked, but people from these orphanages institutions as well. What is it that we're aiming for if we're giving them institutional care? What's after that? These are questions that really need answers. So that's the limitation, and this theory model would benefit from testing in the field to develop indicators that go with the benchmarks that I've identified. So, the qualitative interviews were undertaken, and there were 53 in total. And so, you know, the average of about 80, 85 minutes each interview. Hours and hours and hours, and reams and reams and reams of paper. The Cambodian young women who participated were between 18 and 25, that experienced trafficking and sexual abuse, had spent time in residential care, and they'd been identified as successfully reintegrated. So the organisations who participated gave me a list of 200 who were successfully reintegrated, and I randomly got to these through that process. In addition, they identified types of people like family members, friends, etc. People in the village chiefs. You know, they identified a group of people who they said were important to their integration. So these 28 people were interviewed as well. Not the exact people. They said people liked them. Okay. This is the particular information about the women who participated. I'm not going to labour it. I just want to point out I'm interviewing them when they're about 21. Their experiences of abuse and exploitation are averaging around the age of 15. So when I'm speaking with them, they have had approximately 30 months of time back in a village or in a new community, and they've also had about 22 months of time in a residential care institution or a shelter. So they are looking back. These women are giving us their perspectives of care as youth and children. This is important because they had time to reflect. And I'm not pressing them on the details of the difficulties they experienced. I'm learning from them about their experiences of integration. Now, this research compared their ideals and ideas of reintegration with their experiences. You know, when I ask you what is successful reintegration, you come up with a bunch of things, right? Things come into your mind. It might be related to your job, your family. It might be related to, you know, because we all are seeking to integrate somewhere. Okay, now I'm not sure if you can see it. It's actually a bit difficult to see all the way back there. But let me just emphasize these four ones in the middle are sort of the most predominant. They were all, you know, so during their interviews, a lot of emphasis was given to having a job. When I'm asking about successful reintegration, a lot of emphasis, you know, getting a job. Finishing my studies, the skills in education. So whether that is TAFE, university, sewing, you know, skills in education, critical. A lot of emphasis was on wife and family and acceptance. Now, I'm not going to go through and read them all for you. I'm sorry, that will bore you to tears, but it is hard to see. But there's a whole lot of different sort of nodes or conceptions of reintegration here. What I want to communicate, though, is that the most important one to come through was this idea of acceptance. Because it was not only mentioned, you know, it was in the top four that was mentioned, it was also mentioned the most frequently. And it was also mentioned as a precursor or as a foundation to achieving the others. If you want to have family, you need to be accepted by the family. If you want a job, you must be accepted as a candidate, as an interviewee. Acceptance comes before everything. Acceptance emerged as the most important category. I want to deepen our thinking around acceptance today, but let's start there. Acceptance was the key for understanding this. Okay. Now, everything going on in between them, these are just things you can do within in vivo software with qualitative data these days. You can compare nodes, what was coded under here with what was coded under there, and you can test for levels of association or levels of word similarity to see how it all links together. And it creates some very interesting results. For example, these circles, these nodes are ideas, just displayed by word similarity cluster. I want to point to a few clusters here. Here, these ideas of success were important to everyone, wherever they went, whether they went to a rural or an urban centre. Being accepted, having your health and basic safety needs met, having family or being a wife within that family or a good daughter. I included both under the one category. Employment, skills and education. These things were universally important wherever people were going. However, you see some other groups that show differences, interesting differences, right? These ideas of reintegration, conformity with traditional ideals, comportment, the way you walk and talk, sexuality, your sexual reputation. These ideas reflect understandings of what success looks like in a traditional collectivistic place for a woman. These other group up here, sort of independence, identity, individual identity, cognition, affect, modulation, that's processes of thinking well and being aware, being self-aware of your emotions, and empowerment. So these categories are ideas of reintegrative success that came through in the interviews. These look more related to the skills you need to survive in a modern, urban, individualistic environment. So finally, we have one more group up here, which is related to ending migration and reintegration. What is successful reintegration? It's a goal to be measured. What does this mean, right? Remember, I'm interviewing people important. 16 of the people interviewed who were considered important were protection staff, residential staff members and social workers and things. When you say what is successful reintegration, they say, well, it's the goal, it's our aim, it's what we want to be able to measure. So, and they also, some of them would say, well, successful reintegration, it's about ending unsafe migration. When they're in the one place, right, we know that they're successful, they haven't moved, right? This is the challenge of demonstrating reintegrative success. So these ideas are obviously, they come from practitioners, and they also reflect procedural understandings. They reflect the ideas of reintegration as an intervention. They don't reflect ideas of reintegration as an achievement in social life. So, in sum, I want to talk about three main areas that came through the data. Ideas of successful integration as related to being a traditional achievement within a collectivist, village, rural community. On the other hand, there are ideas around integration that appeared related to a modern, urban, individualistic community. And the other ideas of integration were procedural, bureaucratic. They're about the delivery of assistance. So how is reintegration constructed? Well, I'm talking about these three main ways that were evident through the data. Let me talk about the traditional first. And I'm going to come back to the bureaucratic. The bureaucratic ideas are, well, we provide assistance, but what's our aim? You know, and there are competing ideas for what our aim is, which come through under these sort of ideas. Okay, so what the data indicated was that successful traditional reintegration, keep an eye on the time, was related to the fulfillment of traditional role. Within a Cambodian village environment, right, you have a social hierarchy. You play your role within the social hierarchy to fit in. That's what happens in a collectivist community. And for women, and for these young women in their particular age and stage of life, there's a lot of emphasis upon proper sexuality. They're supposed to be virginal at that age, before marriage. They're supposed to have proper comportment, supposed to walk and talk in ways that are appropriate for a girl of a certain age. And they're supposed to be industrious. They're supposed to be able to, you know, manage the household in a thrifty way, make a bit of money, earn money on the side if you can, you know. Within traditional villages, it's also good if you can earn money close to home. Then you don't have any risk to your reputation, right? You don't have to go a long way. You can do it close from home. So, reintegration happens in places. That happens in families, and it happens in the village. Within the family, if the girl is able to fulfill, to perform within her social role, then she can be affirmed and loved for this in that traditional environment. She can also, critically, be honoured. She honours others who are older or more experienced or whatever, you know, and they in turn honour her for her performance of role. Traditional roles, integration through your traditional role within village community. Okay, reintegration in a traditional environment. Alternatively, within a modern urban individualistic environment, more like Phnom Penh, you have integration, again, within social institutions. Integration happens in places, with groups of people. The most important ones were families and friendships. You know, that's where we can experience love as people, through participating in these relationships. We are affirmed through acceptance or reciprocal recognition through the giving and receiving of love. You are successfully reintegrated in a family if you are loved and you have someone to love there, right? Within the public sphere or in society, on the street, on the road, you know, and this area is emerging in Cambodia, yeah, you have the knowledge of being an equal before the law. Now, while there's a traditional world which might make you lower or higher, or as an equal before the law, you have respect. You have the chance to respect others for their equality and your equality. You can engage with others in a way that affirms your sense of self-respect. Finally, within workplaces or educational institutions, your unique abilities and your talents are put to use, and you may gain esteem. You may be esteemed or recognized or rewarded for your unique contributions. Basically, within the modern world, we have individual identities, right? And it's our role to develop these and to function within social groups and institutions. And we are well integrated into those if we are loved within our personal relationships and families. And from that, we gain a sense of self-confidence. Within the public sphere, we have the opportunity to practice participating in a sphere in which we're all theoretically equal. From that, we can gain self-respect. And within the workplace, we can be esteemed for our unique contributions. And from that, get a sense of our own worth, our self-esteem, right? So, individual identity. Now, what I'm pointing out, maybe some people find it a bit tiring in that it's kind of obvious or something, but keep in mind there's a spectrum. So you've got really traditional places in Cambodia, really collectivistic, and all at the other end, you've got really hyper-individualistic modern places. And these are concepts to talk about life and different places. And we're all somewhere on a spectrum somewhere, right? They don't really exist. These are ideas that help you understand how we integrate within more traditional or more modern places. I want to talk about the findings and the implications. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this procedural delivery of assistance, the ideas that are guiding the delivery of assistance at the moment. So first of all, I just want to reiterate that social exclusion or rejection is the primary problem amongst this particular population. I also want to point out that reintegration appears to be both substantive, something that happens in real life, and it also appears to be something about the delivery of assistance. Procedural and substantive. And there was another approach that appeared. Let me share something first. I'll just read something to give you an idea of a traditional approach to reintegration, as portrayed by one of the government ministers who was interviewed for the study. Let me just get it. So, I asked Madam Satir, I'm making up her name anyway, right? It's not a real name. I've asked Madam Satira, who's a senior government official delivering services to trafficking victims. I asked her to, well, in the course of our interview, she said reintegration is about returning to normal life. And so my question was along the lines of, so what do you mean by normal life, you know, and how is this achievable if they're considered spoiled or bad as a result of their sexualization? Her response, and she directed it to my translator. I'll read her response now. I want to tell him two things. The first thing is that they are sent to the shelter for 1 year, or at least 6 months to 1 year. She has been through the emotional rehabilitation. They live, or they spend their time, by looking at the role models of other victims who can live a normal life, which means she is trained, educated, The second thing is about Khmer culture. Many Khmer women who return home, some get married, some get back to business as usual. Khmer culture is strict. Women are not allowed to go out too much. Living in the shelter is having good education about that. No one would allow women to do that in our culture. So they live as usual with good education in the shelter, so they can listen and understand. But some don't listen. They return to their previous job. We can't say it's 100% successful. For the 1-year follow-up visit, it's also about that issue. We follow up on them. If they have problems and they want to go back to their job, i.e. sex work, we remind them. But we can only do for the women who want to help themselves. If they themselves don't want to be bad people, we ask them to follow us. We are successful. But if they take the left-hand path and want to go back, they will just go. What can we do? We have no right to stop them. It's their right. But do we crack them down? No, we don't crack them down. We crack the brothels down. So, in the course of conversation, I was probing her on what she's saying about honor. She's saying these girls need to have honor in a traditional society, right? I'm probing her. So is that something that she has to have or something the community has to give her? Her response: it's something the community needs to give her because so the experience of abuse or the bad thing, doesn't mean that she wanted that thing to happen to her. She didn't want the abuse. So people around her should look at the reasons behind what happened and accept it. She didn't want it to be that way. Any human being wants to be good, right? I want to say that even if she does choose to do sex work, or sexual relations with anyone, outside of marriage. But it's only because she doesn't have a choice. This is the only reason she did it. So this book, and she's talking about a book about rights here, this book is what we wanted them to understand about victims' rights. We want the world to know, but we can't disseminate to other countries, we want our nation to know that amongst all these victims, none of them want to be criticised. It's none. It's because they don't have a choice. What's the significance of that? Why am I labouring that? From a traditional perspective, we're helping them to regain their traditional role. And the provision of shelter care is about helping them achieve that role. Traditionally speaking, yeah? And this is one of the approaches that informs the delivery of care. Not just at senior official levels, but also within some of the organisations providing help. You've got some people who think more this way, right? And they think this way for a reason. The reason is that traditional life is actually pretty much like that. If we could just get them to play along and be good and play the right role, then they could be included. So this isn't just because they're conservative trying to keep the culture. They're actually wanting to protect the girls. Protect them by helping them to become more traditional so they can be accepted and included back in. Yeah. Now, that's one way that informs the delivery of assistance. There's another this is what comes through policies and rights and conventions related to reintegration. This is a more modern, legal, juridicially led idea of reintegration. In legal discourse, traditional legal discourse, we assume that the individual is free, born free, right? Our negative rights protect us from external interference by the state or others. Our positive rights help us to pick up and enjoy that, and forms of compensation. These things help us to then realise our freedom. The problem is, when they're being removed from sexual exploitation, brothels, etc., they're not free, even when they're removed, right? That's why there's such intensive provision of services. They still need a lot of help, right? Why? So, there is some positives to this. There was another approach that I came across in the shelters